Are you drinking hot coffee or cold?
It is hot.
Wow.
I need one of those cold coffee thermosy thingies that you put in the fridge.
Oh, like that turns your hot coffee cold?
Yeah, is that how you get your iced coffee?
No, I wait so long because I'm
And then
chasing
just
a
boom, iced coffee.
5-year-old that it's cold by the time I'm back. And then I add
Love
this
that.
thing called ice.
We don't have ice here. Our fridge doesn't have an ice maker anymore. We
I thought you,
downgraded
I thought you meant the
in
state of
Texas.
Texas. There's
No
no
ice. It's
ice
all
here.
melted.
It's
Honestly,
sizzling hot.
probably. Probably.
Well, Kelly and I are both New York, right? Kelly, you're New York?
Yeah. I didn't realize you were in New
Yeah.
York.
So we don't have the sizzling. I'm upstate,
Wait, what town are you in?
Rochester.
Oh, cool. It's so cute there.
Yeah, it is pretty cute. I like it. I'm gonna stay here forever. Anywho, okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes. Okay, will you do just a quick introduction, who you are, what you do for a living?
Yeah, so my name is Kelli Anderson. I'm a graphic designer and I went to art school and I think I chose to be a graphic designer because it's such a vague term. It allows me to play with type, play with the structure of books, play with signage and like spatial graphics and like restaurant design and things like that. So I've sort of taken advantage of that in my career and have done things that are all over the place from like book design and construction to kind of like physical experiments with paper to reso printing to animation. So yeah, my work is all over the place in a joyful way, I think.
Did you always know that you wanted to go into something creative, or was this like when you were coming down to it, you're like, well, this seems cool?
No, I was one of those kids that was drawing from the very beginning. I have the most boring, predictable kind of life bio, in that I was in elementary school and they put me in the talented art program and I stayed there and then I went to art school and then I went to grad school for art. So it's kind of the only thing I can really do well. Besides, I'm getting better at writing.
I feel like there's nothing wrong with being predictable. I actually sort of love predictability. And for me, in my adult life, I'm finding that I really thrive on structure and routine. And whenever people ask me that exact same question, which I know is like such a dull question, but it also is really helpful for framing it for someone who hasn't met you before. But I was so lucky to have that predictability of knowing when I was really young that I wanted to go into some form of the creative arts. And I didn't know graphic design existed. And when I figured it out, I was like, that's the one. That's the one for me. I was like a toss up between interior design and graphic design. I think I've said this on the podcast before, but Trading Spaces. Did you watch that show on TLC?
I love how often Trading Spaces comes up in our life.
Yeah, it was epic. I mean, going back and watching it now, it was horrifying. Like, let's put glue. Let's cover your wall with Elmer's glue. Like, here's an idea. Hear me out. Let's put Elmer's glue all over your wall and then put hay. Just hay.
And then the people would walk in and sometimes they'd be delighted, but a lot of times they'd be just horrified.
Yeah. Or like, let's paint the room top to bottom red. Let's paint the carpet while we're at it. I don't know if that actually happened, but like that was what really like struck a chord with me. And my sister, who's a fine artist, was like, what the heck are you watching? No interest in that show. And also went into the arts, but like, yeah, we were like exactly the same, but totally different. So I think that predictability is actually quite an asset. And even though you had a maybe predictable, you knew from a young age, your work is anything but predictable.
Yeah, and part of that might be I've kind of always gone the path of the most freedom. So, like, when I was in art school, I didn't really know what graphic design was. I assumed it was advertising, and I didn't want anything to do with advertising. So, I went into studio art because if I identified as a studio artist, I had access to the painting studio, the photography studio, like silkscreen lab, all of these things. And so I've kind of done the same thing in my adult life too, where if I identified as a fine artist, I would have to produce a hideout in my studio, produce a major show every year, work with one gallery, sell my work to like super rich people. I don't know, the fact that I have more freedom and can make these small like zine editions that are like for sale for $1 or make a logo that like a client pays me like $30,000 to make. I really like that kind of set your own schedule, set your own clients, set your own wage kind of life as a designer.
Something that you just said, you said it was the path like of the most freedom. It's like the opposite of the path of least resistance, because I know that I found the more freedom I have, the more challenging it is, because then I have to make all the decisions. And there are a lot of things I've done in my adult life that help me to make less decisions. And that might be someone with ADHD talking, because that's executive functioning 101. But there are so many things I've started doing in my day-to-day life that I no longer have to make a decision. And when you have too much freedom, you have to be the creative director, you have to be the art director, you have to write the creative brief. And one of the things that a lot of the artists we work with have a hard time with is putting enough parameters on their work that they aren't just staring at a blank canvas and feeling this paralysis of what on earth should I draw, but then they need enough restriction that they have like a project. But it sounds like you actually thrive when there's no boundaries and you just have to figure it out.
I think I have just a little bit of like a naturally anarchistic personality. But I mean, I totally relate to that. Having like some structure is helpful. For example, I've been working with Letterform Archive on a pop-up book about letter forms and type for the past 4 years now. And I've had a really hard time approaching, it's a pop-up book, so there's lots of steps. I have to write the essays, so produce the content, do the research, as well as come up with the physical mechanisms for the pop-ups. Then there's a whole phase where it's like, okay, like we're doing graphic design now, and you want to just support the content, of course, but it also has to make sense with the structure of the book. And there's been so many elements up in the air because we're trying to like nail pricing. We don't want this to be like the most expensive book on earth. So it's like, where do the essays go? Are we putting them after the pop-ups? Do they come in their own separate book? And so the fact that all of that has been up in the air, I haven't been able to move forward. So I totally understand a little bit of structure is super helpful, but there's this other part of me where I think I require so much emotionally from my work. I want it to wow me in certain ways. I want it to, I don't know, like I want to invent something new. I want to feel like my work is going towards some new vision or like some path forward that no one else has seen yet. So all of those things are unreasonable on their own. So everything else that falls in around it, structure, no structure, whatever, it's like, I can deal.
That's a big goal too, to have to want to do something that nobody's seen before. That kind of thing, if I'm sitting down to create, that is what paralyzes me. I'm like, oh my gosh, how the heck do I start with a brief of make something brand new that nobody's ever seen before? And so generally, like, I have to start with a little nugget of something that exists that inspires me to jump off from. So do you have some of those, like, or how do you kind of get your sparks and your ideas that these never before seen things sprout from? Do you have like a process of saving little ideas, or what do you do?
Yeah. And I realize that I kind of sound like an egomaniac there because, I mean, I don't
Not
like,
at all. Not even the slight.
but I don't want to like kid myself and think that I'm making things that are like truly new. I'm influenced by other people. I love the fact that we live in a particular moment that things rise into the zeitgeist and like a lot of people are doing the same thing at once. Like I don't feel like proprietary about my work, but I do get really excited about revealing to people that there's possibility hiding in plain sight where they assumed that there was nothing, which is really why I love working with paper. I love pushing paper to sort of like its technological extreme in terms of making it function. And it really is like there's a lot of experimentation. So you're totally right. I will like create these little experiments that are like halfway there. I'm like, okay, this is like a very promising germ of an idea. And then I kind of wait for the right moment, the right email to come into my inbox or the right person to have like a client job where they're like, we're just looking for a really cool invitation to whatever. And I'm like, well, I have the thing for you. My friend, I don't know if you all know Keitra Dean Dixon. She's another graphic designer who she also like makes crayons and stuff. I don't know. Her practice is all over the place also. Keitra said something that I found really interesting is that clients always kind of like want to order from the book. Like they want to hire you to do work that you've already done. And so it's really up to you to do a very good job of keeping a sketchbook and sort of like self-chronicling all of the little directions you organically like want to move in, and then just wait for like the right match to pay for it essentially and like make it real. And I've been just magically lucky that that keeps happening, that I'll have an idea in the back of my head like, oh, I really love to do that, and then like someone reaches out and it just seems like the perfect fit. So I don't even know if I'm a good designer, if I just have too many silly little like half-baked projects in search of a match, you know?
There were so many little golden nuggets. I feel like, Katie, you got something on the tip of your tongue. What is it? Go for it.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I love that you are such a natural experimenter, and I really envy that, because I have this perfectionistic quality in me that I am actively working against, but it keeps me, it's like really difficult for me to just try something knowing that it could be a failure or that it could not work in the end. And I feel like everything I invest in needs to amount to something. And that's my toxic trait, I think, because then then at the other end, if it doesn't wow me or if it didn't turn out well, I like take that on as a personal failure, and I take that weight and I'm like, oh crap, I can't do anything, and it really weighs me down. And I've always wanted to be one of those people that sees something on the street and they're like, oh, I have the vision of this whole project based on that. And I really don't feel like naturally that person, but I think like having a practice of just keeping a sketchbook or something, that's why I've never really been able to fill a sketchbook, because I just struggle so much with just doing a small idea and letting it be. And if it develops later, that's fine. But anyway, on the other side of the spectrum, that's me.
I relate to that. And I think that's one of the reasons Katie and I were so drawn to your work. I remember when I first discovered your work was when you and Becky Simpson were the first, I believe you guys were the first Adobe residents. And the thing that threads through both of your work that I so badly envy and want to take from you both, which is what we do. We take things from other people and we build our own work from it, right? Is that you play. And I was like, oh, when I have kids, like I'll be so into like playing, like I'll learn so much about play. But if it's not a creative practice, it can be a struggle. And I think a lot of people struggle with this aspect of play. And I just imagine, Kelli, you're at a restaurant and you're like, you get the end of a straw and your food's taking way too long. I just imagine that you're a professional tinkerer and that you would be like, I'm going to turn this straw or the paper into a folded, let's see how many letters I can create out of this folded straw wrapper. Whereas I would be like twiddling my thumbs, jumping up and down, like out of my seat. And it's something that I like really, really am drawn to in other people's work that I hope I find ways to incorporate into my own.
I mean, I think we're all, and this is the thing about creative people, I think we're all more similar than we are different. It's an emotional thing that, like, Katie, I don't think you should be so hard on yourself. You've probably had these experiences where you are working on something, it gets to be like, I don't know, midnight or 1 a.m. and you're like, this is awesome. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, who did this? This is awesome. You want that feeling, right? It's an emotional thing. Like you need that,
it's like a drug.
Yeah, totally. And it's not like, oh, does Instagram vote it up or does the client say it's good? It's like, if it's about yourself and you're being honest with yourself, everyone wants to feel like they have a purpose, you know? And I don't think it's wrong to chase that. I mean, I've noticed that like chasing that feeling, and I don't know if it's like perfectionism more than just getting that like emotional high from my work, but I've definitely missed a lot of deadlines because I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. It's not there yet. It's not fun. It's a real drag, but it's also like these creative projects don't necessarily, I don't know, they don't necessarily fit neatly into time, into schedules. And so it's like always a struggle to do creative things on command. Especially if you have like a family and all of these other things to juggle. Like it's, you know, it's everything we do is like nearly impossible. So yeah, be kind to yourself.
Yeah. That's great advice. And I give it to others. You know how that is. You can see in other people and be like, be nice. Don't talk to yourself like that. And then you're your own meanest critic.
It's interesting what you said about how social media or like your client's timeline, like, it's better to take the time to do it right. And so I guess I have like a two-part the first thing is, I think all the things you previously said are why passion projects are so important. And those can be really hard to carve the time out for. But if you have this like inkling of an idea, like you can wait, or you can like start planting the seed of that little idea for yourself. And I think a really good example is like, if you want to write a book, actually, Becky Simpson gave me this advice before I submitted my proposal to try and for my first book. She was like, just if you have an idea for a book, don't keep it sacred and like hold it to yourself until you can find a book agent or whatever. Just actually put it out there and see if people respond. And if they respond, keep going and make more and make more. And that's leverage to then go find your book agent. So I feel like the importance of passion projects is A, you got to be doing the work that you're really excited about, but B, if you have a seedling of an idea and it doesn't currently fit into the client, keep it in your notebook, keep it in your like idea list. And for me, that idea list is miles long, and that feels overwhelming in and of itself. But the more I can refer back to it, the more tangible it feels.
Yeah. I want to like build on what you said because that's great advice. Becky is so sweet and also like so wise. I felt really lucky to be a creative resident at the same time as Becky. But I found that same thing to be true. In fact, there's 3 ways I've made books in the past. So the first way was the most traditional route in that I pitched a book that thinking of an idea to Chronicle Books, and they said yes, and then we developed it together. Then that was This Book as Planetarium. Then with This Book as a Camera, I totally made that by myself while I was a creative resident because Adobe was paying my rent. So I was like, sure, I'll spend all my savings printing this book. And then MoMA republished it. And so like it did find a publisher. And I have to tell you, that second process was a lot easier. When I went through a publisher, there was a lot more arguments. There was a lot more like, what do we spend the budget on? And like, when MoMA signed on to produce the camera book, they had something that was completely finished in their hand. There was no like describing it. There was no slippage between what I'm describing and what the picture is in their head. So they knew exactly what they were getting into. And so if I'm not saying this is definitely a position of privilege I was coming from because Adobe was paying for my life at this point, but if you have the option to bring your passion project, the further you get it along, the easier the process of collaborating with a publisher or anyone who's going to distribute it is going to be, because otherwise you're making someone that you don't know your creative partner, and that usually goes off the rails. Let's be honest.
That is such humbling advice. Like I want to like repeat that because I wrote my entire book, or what I thought was my entire book, before pitching it because I did never pitch before. I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. So I wrote what every page would be, but I didn't write like every long essay. It was like maybe for the long essay, I'm talking 1 to 2 pages. And of course, when I signed with an editor, we changed a ton, and like the title changed and the graphic sort of style changed. And ultimately, I think it was for the better because they knew the market better than I did. I'd never written a book. I was very naive. Can barely write with proper grammar. You can just ask Katie where a comma goes. Literally, I ask her all the time, I don't even ask her. I just put the comma in the wrong spot and she fixes it. But I had so much change. And so it would have looked really different. And I don't know if that's for better or for worse, but that's a really humbling reminder. Yeah, those passion projects are pretty incredible.
It's definitely interesting to bring another party into a passion project. And I've had an interesting experience, not with a book, but with my passion project called the Monster Project, where a museum eventually reached out to me and was like, oh, we want to host this project of yours. And so they brought me to Berlin and it was super awesome. But some of the things that they wanted to like tweak or change, I just didn't feel confident enough in myself to be like, no.
No.
And I was also like open. I certainly didn't think I had all the answers. I had reasoning behind why I did things a certain way in the project. But when, a big museum is like, we're going to do it this way, I was like, okay. But in the end, there were some things that went wrong or like went not very smoothly because we made those changes. And it definitely like made me feel like I need to be more steadfast in my vision sometimes. Like it's hard to find that line between collaboration and knowing what parts are good to go. And so that's definitely some lessons that I've learned in bringing other people into passion projects.
The way that you talked about like someone else coming in, both of you, someone else comes in and kind of changes it. I feel like this is a perfect parallel to how your work really emphasizes the lo-fi, low res. There's this dichotomy between that and like the high res life. And I feel like the high res, the social media, it really it's like that third party oftentimes. And you share your idea and it doesn't stick. And then you're like, well, I guess it sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, instead of saying it sucked, you could say, okay, I need to change the language and try again. Or, okay, I need to change how I share this. Like a really good example is you could post the exact same piece of content in 3 different ways, and one of them will do better than the others. And so whether it goes viral or not, it's just how people interpret that information, who sees it. And some of it's out of our control. But that definitely is a cloud for me, that high res on my ideas. However, I can't remember how you refer to it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on like, how do you balance that with creating these projects that are things that people haven't seen before and that are different from the mold and that aren't the things that are typically like, they're not what everyone's talking about. How do you balance those things?
Yeah, well, I think in part, like I'm responding to an emotional need in that I feel in myself. Like, especially during the pandemic, there was so much of our lives that were happening on screen where it's like, yeah, I'm going to dance class or I'm going to yoga, but it wasn't anything like that. And I think during that time period, I became super aware of the difference between our on-screen 2D one sensory channel flattened into information life and like the full surround sound sensory humans we all are, that we don't really talk about. Never before have we really thought about like the difference between chatting with friends on Zoom and being in a bar, smelling someone's perfume, being able to like give someone a hug. And then like all of a sudden we were just like so aware of all of those things. And so, I mean, I think that because of the pandemic and I don't know, I guess because of some of my other experiences growing up, I just understand just in a deep way that like it isn't all of the story. In fact, like if we're talking about Instagram, the algorithm's so heavy-handed now that I never take anything personally. I'm like, oh, well, it didn't get a lot of likes because I posted it at 8 a.m., not 7:30, and that's who cares, like that kind of thing. I really feel this yearning to reconnect people like with the magic of the physical world, like whether that is, all of the little dots of like grain, like in a Riso print, where you can really like feel the texture of that paper peeling off of a drum, or whether it's like a stop motion paper animation, or whether it's something like this book is Planetarium or this book is a camera, like a pop-up book that's asking you to engage with different elements of the physical world. I feel like there's definitely like different kinds of connections you can make with people, and you can it's very easy. I mean, every time I scroll past social media, I just kind of like everything. It doesn't necessarily have to move me or touch me in any way. But I think what I'm going for with my work is I really want to give people a connection to themselves, a connection to their world, a connection to different ideas and a set of possibilities that weren't there before. And I know that sounds way too ambitious for a graphic designer, but it's something that like I've experienced before in other people's work and have managed to pull off before. So I think of it as more like a quality rather than quantity. And so I don't know. Sometimes I make things and I'm like, oh, that did well on social media. Cool. I have more followers, which is essentially some kind of currency or power in our modern world. But if I meet up with someone and they say like, I used this book, I played with it with my daughter, and it was like the first time she noticed this. And now everywhere she goes, she points out the stars or something. It's like, it's serious. I don't know. I feel like I've lived for something. So I don't know. I'm rambling, but.
No, you're not. I feel like the way you said that was so genuine. And I think other people have been like, well, I just want to help people. And you're like, do you? It just feels really, really real and raw when you talk about it. And I think that shows through your work, because even your books, it's not just, well, I thought these colors looked nice together. Like every single piece is so detail oriented. And there's so much thought put into it, especially with your interactive projects. You are talking about the human experience, and that all comes down to connection and how people experience things. And it's different online.
Those moments of real connection feels so rare these days, but when you have them, I never feel as energized. And it's just like such a special feeling to ride. Like, I'm glad that I'm not doing craft fairs anymore because it was eating up a lot of my soul. But on the other side of things, the part that was really filling me up was the interactions with people and them actually like seeing my work and having it mean something to them and having them be able to look in my eyes and like tell me what it specifically meant to them. Or like I had some posters that were like Carl Sagan quotes and people were like using them in their baby's nursery. And there just are these things that you get from being in person with people that are so special. Like showing at a gallery. I mean, it's so much work and it's draining in a lot of ways, but dang, it's special and it's so rare now that I'm just used to seeing a like and having like a small spike of serotonin, but it's a big, much bigger, different feeling when it's real.
I think, first of all, I think you mean dopamine. Is that right? Did I get it right?
I mean,
is it serotonin or dopamine?
I think both.
How do I get more of both of them? What's the difference? Someone come back and let us know the difference. I'm just researching all of these things too because I'm trying to do natural ways. Greg and I are like, first thing in the morning, let's go out and get sunlight. Anyway, something that Katie and I have, I just like called you out. I'm sorry, Katie. Like, I know science better than you.
Serotonin.
Oh, she's Googling it.
It creates a long-lasting feeling of happiness or well-being.
Backwards.
No,
not long-lasting.
They both do.
They're not short?
Dopamine is temporary.
Yeah, that's the one.
Serotonin is long-lasting. Okay, but they're all like happy.
They're the same. Okay, we like happiness, whether it's long or short. Prefer long.
There's like oxytocin too. I don't know what that one. I think that's like the bonding, like when a baby's born, like the bonding love chemical or something. Like I think it's the falling in love one.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's in that Billie Eilish song too. My strange addiction.
I think there's like 7 different chemicals that make happiness in your brain, and there's like different ways to get it.
I love that. I want all the ways. So just one thing you said about the in-person, Katie and I had an experience with this where we have this event called the Conference, and our business is completely digital. And Katie and I have only met in person 3 times. And when we were able to meet the second time, when we were able to meet the second time, we were at Creative Works in Memphis, and we both walked away. We were like a month out from hosting our first conference, and we walked away being like, this energy is unmatched. The fact that we're together, the fact that we're with these people who share a common goal with us. Someone came up to us and said the nicest thing. It made our day. Then we would go out to people and compliment them on their talk. And like, it was unparalleled. Like, we were able to actually connect people in a way that we would never be able to do online. And as we're a digital company, one of the challenges we've had, which has been fun, like a good challenge, is figuring out how to build relationships and how to create spaces where we can try our best to replicate those in-person experiences. And of course, we can never replicate it. It's never going to be exactly the same, but we can do our best to create something with multiple touch points and really make sure the people in those groups are good, make sure the conversations are transparent and full of love and sincerity and whatever. And that's definitely been a challenge, I think, for a lot of digital, especially digital creators, especially on the internet. It's like showing up and doing a dance. Is that going to make someone laugh? Sure. Do I feel silly? Maybe a little bit. Or like recording in public. But when we're watching them, we're not typically thinking, this is not the same. If I saw this in person, this would be different. We're just thinking like, oh, like I got that hit, or it's just different. And I think we're all trying to do our best to make it level the playing field because we're such a digital world, but it'll never be the same.
And to find something that's like authentic and not performative, but still like attention grabbing is the hardest thing to do.
That's like an oxymoron. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Don't be performative, but get my attention in the first 3 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a case we need to crack.
I feel like I've been dealing with that same challenge because I've been teaching a lot. During the pandemic, I was like really craving community and connection and realized that I had a lot of followers in this big platform. And so I was like, everyone's suffering. Let's just get together and fold some origami tessellations, like let's make an event where there's nothing. And so I did that a couple of times online where I would send people out these packets. I mailed out like hundreds and hundreds of like these packets. And then on a certain date, we'd all meet on Instagram Live and like fold paper together and talk about what lockdown was like in Iran and what lockdown was like in Mexico and all of these places. It was so beautiful and it felt like so good that I've been teaching like more and more. And every year now I'm teaching an online paper engineering class. And it really is, it's a challenge to figure out like how to make everyone feel like they're in the same room, even though, it's nighttime in some people's houses and like morning in other people's houses. But I feel like, I don't know, I'm getting better at it. There are some tools like Zoom is, for how sick everyone is of Zoom, it's actually like, it's pretty good. And they've made it better, like where people aren't always like talking over each other. And so if you can create an open dialogue there, we also set up like a Discord group where people could, at any time of day, post the problems they're having or like show off a project that they're excited about. And so they get slightly competitive, but also like supportive. It's really like meant a lot to me. I mean, I have fallen behind on like a lot of the other projects I was trying to get out the door because I was like, actually, like maybe I just want to be a teacher all the time. This is really awesome.
Yeah. So when you were, go ahead, Katie.
I was going to say one of my favorite examples of like a online community vibe that came out of COVID and lockdown was, do y'all know Christina Tozzi from Milk Bar?
Yeah. I heard of her. I worked with her.
She's so amazing and she's Are you freaking kidding me? Okay, you have to tell me everything after this. But Christina Tozzi, she is an amazing chef and mostly does like baked goods, and she is the owner of Milk Bar. She just created this daily bake club kind of stream on Instagram. Wow. And so every day,
I remember you doing this, Katie.
Yes, and she did it with things that people would just have lying around in like their house. Yeah, well, I mean, she's very creative with what you would make, but she would be like, okay, if you have pretzels, if you have butter, if you have oats, let's grind up the oats and make a flour. Let's do that. And you just follow along with her. And she was so like, the experimental vibe with Christina is amazing, because I was sitting there being like, how much am I supposed to measure of this and how much of that? And she was like, just
dump it in.
Yeah, dump it in. And like, it's funny because baking is such a scientific thing, but she loves experimenting and figuring out what are you going to get and substituting things. But anyway, it just blew up, and she's still doing Bake Club or whatever it's called to this day. I like stumbled on it the other day because it just fostered such a sense of community, and she did it for free out of the love in her heart. However, I'm sure it grew her following like exponentially.
She was already a TV host, right?
Yeah. She was already a superstar.
She had a group of people she could tap into, but then she decided they're already here. I might as well serve them. I might as well do something for free. And
I have no idea how many people found her through that, but I'm sure it was a ton. Because how cool is that? Just like a fun community thing to join in. But wait, Kelly, what? Tell me. You've worked with her?
Can you share?
Yeah, I have. Well, so I redesigned Momofuku's logo, so they're associated with them. This is a hilarious assignment.
That's so cool.
So David Chang, he's kind of like separated out from the business now. He's like being a dad. If you look at his life on Instagram, he's not in the office. He got Marguerite Mariscal. She is the daughter of the people who own and run Zabar's, which is like a famous grocery store in New York City. And she became CEO of Momofuku when she was like 28 or something. So David Chang was like kind of stepping down, and this highly effective young woman came in. Anyway, she reached out to me and she was like, okay, so we have this logo. I don't know where it came from. Someone's like brother's uncle's cousin designed it. There's embarrassing things about it. I don't even know what's embarrassing about it. I just know it's embarrassing. Can you make us look more professional? And it would be better if David Chang couldn't tell the difference. Like if you could just make subtle tweaks and like make it subtly better. But we don't want to have to like get all the approvals, because he'll have some crazy idea to turn it into the Metallica logo, and then the purpose of this exercise is the opposite. And so I did that. I did a really good job. It looked better. No one had to sign off on it. It just kind of went up in all of the restaurants. We didn't make a big deal out of it. Yeah, a couple months later, they're opening Fuku, which is like their fried chicken sandwich joint. And she's like, okay, we need a logo for this. We need to figure out what the interior looks like. We need some backlit signs made, all of the stuff. So did that, and then finally getting to Milk Bar, they were opening a location in DC, and Milk Bar had, I guess, like a presence within this larger development. So I met with Christina and her.
That's the only one I've been to.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I didn't have a whole lot to do with that one because I'm in New York, but I made the wrap, like the coming soon, like get excited. This is Milk Bar and Momofuku are coming soon. So I made that wrap for the building. When had a lot of meetings with Christina, and I unfortunately can't eat gluten, so I cannot eat anything. I can't eat anything at Momofuku. I can't eat anything at Milk Bar.
Yes.
It's fine. But
Right. So
I'm legit foaming at the mouth. This is a dream. I'm living vicariously through you.
I wonder, I think that people listening are going to say, how do you book a project like this?
Yeah.
And yeah, do you do outreach? Did this fall in your lap? What advice would you give to people if they're like, that's my dream project?
Yeah, tell me specifically exactly how to do it.
I mean, I honestly feel like I have Forrest Gumped my way into like a lot of significant things in New York City, and I'm not exactly sure how. I don't think it's because of anything I did intentionally. I redesigned Russ and Daughters, which was like a 100-year-old bagel and lock store.
Wow.
Very, very deeply
It's the
beloved.
best. Amazing.
Yeah, they're really, really good. And so that was a couple years earlier that the fourth generation owners of Russ and Daughter, like they inherited the restaurant from their dad. And they're like, well, we'd like to give people a place to sit, like a stand-up counter where you get a sandwich and go away. And so they're like, let's make a cafe where people can go and sit. And they were looking for a graphic designer to redo their logo. And they somehow found me. I think this is still, I was like riding high off of giving a TED talk. And so I was just like in the public eye. And so they're like, okay, Kelly's a contender for this. So I went in and met with them. They met with some other designers and I got that job. And that job, working with small businesses is like great. It's kind of like if your personality, if you think it's great that you start a job designing a logo and then end up designing an entire restaurant from floor to ceiling, then working with a small business might be great for you. Because like when the owners are doing 5 million, when the owners are like cooking the food, running the books, hiring people, they naturally think like, oh, well, why would I hire a logo designer and a website designer and an architectural designer? They're like, oh yeah, our designer will do it. And that suits my personality perfectly. So I had a lot of control and got to make a really cool place. So I designed Russ and Daughters Cafe, the menus, the wallpaper, the booths you sit in, the ceiling, the facades, like all of that stuff. And yeah, it went over really well because I think when people heard that, oh, this 100-year-old institution is making a new location, everyone was like, oh, how is this going to turn out? Like, is it going to be like the Epcot Center version of this thing we know and love? Then when it was great, when we did everything in line with like the spirit and values of the old place and just infused love into like every little like detail there, people noticed that and they were super excited. And so I think Marguerite knew me from that, and that's why she brought me in. She's like, okay, this person gets it. But this person's not going to make something that's like hokey or overwrought or like, she'll make something that's like in line with like the sensibilities of like New York City. So yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah. Have you done a lot of restaurants since then? Has that become sort of like your niche? Because the stuff that you create for yourself is far from that.
Yeah. I really haven't. Like, there have been different restaurants that have reached out, but if I don't feel like a personal connection in some way, it's hard for me to do my best work. And so I was really excited about Momofuku because I kind of like loved the way they brought this almost like punk rock element to dining, you know? And David Chang is hilarious, and the food, even though I can't eat it, I know it's good, and it like mixes a lot of different cultures.
Yeah.
So I was legitimately excited, but like sometimes a job will come along and I'm like, okay, I should probably take this, but I'm not excited enough about it that it is going to end up being awesome. Then I kind of just like, this isn't good career advice, I don't think, but like I just kind of followed where my excitement is. So like if I'm most excited about working on a pop-up alphabet book for 4 years, then like that's what I'm going to do. So yeah, that's just how it's worked out so far.
What does excite you? What projects come through your door?
Yeah, well, so I have a friend who's working on a product right now. So it's a digital product. It's like an app where they're working with a neuroscientist. The reason why I said, oh, there's oxytocin too. They're working with a neuroscientist to figure out how to make people happy and like what makes people happy. How do you trigger people's memories to have them connect with like a memory in their past where they were happy, to get them to like reach out to a friend that they crave connection to.
Wow.
So I'm working with my friend's company. I think I can't talk about this too much because I think I'm under NDA. But yeah, I'm working on some like interactive fun paper things that are the one purpose of them is to like make the recipient feel joy and feel excitement and like get them into the product. I'm really excited about that. I'll send you all a video when we get off this call. I've been trying to design a cover for this Letterform archive book for like literally years now. I had a cover, I thought it was final, but I looked at it and then I was like, yeah, I don't know. I think it could be better. It's all white paper. It's kind of a mess, but I have this prototype where it's a 7-segment display, like an alarm clock, you know, where it has a little dun 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 dun, and it's an A, and you like move your finger in this thing, and all of the little bars change, and it turns into a Z, and it's just like,
Oh, that's
I'm so excited about it. It's like, it's thrilling. It takes like half a second for it to do its thing, but I'm like, yes, this is good. So I'm like super excited.
That's so
about
cool.
that. I know. I'm just really
I
excited.
love that. I can't wait to see it. I think a lot of people hear the advice like to niche down and like just do one thing. And I think you're such great proof that your niche doesn't have to be in your execution or like your final product, but it needs to be in the way that you approach your work. And it sounds like there's a common theme of play and experimentation and value and human connection. And those are the things that make Kelli Anderson Kelli Anderson. And that's why people are drawn to work with you, not because, oh, she's the best designer around, but actually she's a designer with a ton of heart and a ton of thought that goes into her process, whether it's a restaurant rebrand or a book that turns into a planetarium. So I think that's like a really big takeaway for people who are listening, that you don't have to like niche down and be like, I'm a greeting card designer. I design greeting cards that are, I mean, granted, Katie and I design a lot of greeting cards, but a lot of the students that we work with, they're like, okay, well, so should I only design greeting cards for Halloween? You can if that's what's going to make you happy, but actually you could just say, I really love things that are spooky and thoughtful and long lasting and full of message. And that could be the thing that unites all your work. And that can be your purpose instead of this convoluted short term.
Yeah, we talk so much about strategy and thinking logically. How am I going to stand out? How am I going to run my business? We talk a lot about the money side of things, but it's so important to remember to gut check and to not get into something because you think it's the right thing, but there also has to be a passion behind it or else you're going to burn out. And so I think it's just such a good reminder that you can have a mix of strategy and heart and you can be successful.
Yeah. I know because I think
your goals, Kelli.
Yeah, I think that like, honestly, and there are people who are the opposite of this. Nothing that I do quickly is very good. I kind of have to work for a really long time on things pretty good. I really can only go the distance and maintain the vitality in a project if I'm excited about it, if I'm happy. And so I feel like a lot of what I do to make sure I do good work is just merely like keeping myself happy. And that doesn't necessarily mean like, I don't know, I'm just going to like take a nap. I mean, I guess I take a nap when I want to, but it's not like I'm giving myself permission to be lazy. But I just feel like it's a human right that my labor and my work and like what my hands are doing, what my brain is doing is connecting, is animated by like a legitimate desire within me to do it. Otherwise, it becomes such a drag, especially for creative people. Like we were talking about like color combinations earlier. Like I have definitely seen color combinations that just make my heart sing, you know, just like two circles overlapping next to each other with some overprint. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so good. And like, you have to maintain that level of emotional sensitivity, I think, to be a good designer, to understand the difference between what these colors feels like and these colors feel like. And so you're not like a hammer, you're not a blunt object, you know, like you can't drive yourself into the ground like that. You kind of have to take care of your heart, I think.
That's well said. And here we were going to ask you all these really ridiculous questions about would you rather that are so obscure and silly, but I feel like we could end here. I feel like I've got some really good takeaways.
Well, yeah, no, this has been really a great reminder.
Yeah, maybe I have one little thing I want to tell you about. It's kind of like an ad for something, but it's like a massive experiment too. Earlier this year, I applied to teach at this research institution, and the position was part teaching and part like experiments. And I was so excited and got myself all psyched up that I was just going to be doing experiments full time and all this stuff. And I didn't end up getting the job. And so as a fallback, I was like, well, I could do this anyway, probably. And so I've decided that like every month for the next year, I'm coming up with some kind of interactive paper experiment, and people can sign up on my Patreon and get good mail every month from me, basically. So it's kind of like one thing fell through, but like there's another route to it. And yeah, it's been like really super fun so far. So like this is what I'm doing for the next year besides the pop-up book.
Amazing. Amazing. We're going to put a link to that in the show notes, but I love that you shared that the reason you got to that was because the other way you tried didn't work, because Katie and I know very, very closely that it takes so many no's to get to the yes, and that like sometimes it happens because something else is there. Sometimes it just happens because it happens, but it's not the end of the road. Of course, it's just a change of direction. And Katie and I have changed directions just like a couple times, just kidding, like a bajillion times. So we totally get that. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. We'll be joining. Katie's dog is making an appearance. Hi, cutie pie. Okay, so let's end with actually 2 designers that are really inspiring your work right now, or just creatives, doesn't have to be design.
I think I'm always inspired by Matt Willey. He's at Pentagram right now. I think it's because I've been doing a lot of like editorial layouts and book covers and design and stuff like that for the Letter from Archive book. But I find myself looking back at his work a whole lot. And it's just like, I don't know, the layouts are just kind of like, they make sense and they're conservative in a way, but they're also like radically experimental. So I don't know, I'm pretty excited about his work right now. And yeah, I think that I've been looking at some of Louise Sandhaus. I met her recently and kind of like went down a rabbit hole with her work. I'm very inspired by her. In the obscure category, I have been researching a lot of interactive, like pull tab Victorian books, you know, where you like pull a tab. And so I don't know if he really counts as a designer, but there's a interactive book guy named Lothar Meggenfaller who was like from, I don't know.
Wow, that's a name.
The 1880s. But they're so fun. It was kind of like before radio and TV and all of the stuff. And so people really would get really excited about like pulling a tab and like having a whole bunch of monkeys at a table like throw pie and go like this. So I've been ordering his books.
We have a children's book series that my kids are obsessed with that has some of that. And to see it through their eyes, I can totally see why people who didn't have TV or radio were, I mean, I get fascinated by it. I think they're the cutest books I've ever seen. They're from Lotta something. They're like the cook in a book.
Oh, I should say her name.
Yes.
Inspiration. She's awesome.
Yeah. Her little kids' books are just, there's one page where it's quote unquote pizza dough. You smash the dough. You see your little kids with their little fingers and they're pushing. It's so cute. And I'm like, wait, I want to turn. Anyway, that's great. I'm going to check out that wonderful book person with the very intricate name. What a beautiful name. Okay, well, I loved talking with you.
Likewise.
I love hearing about your process and about how you experiment. I think you're a professional tinkerer. And I can't wait to apply this to my workflow. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, you all. And thanks for being patient with me, showing up late.
Oh, you're great. All good things.